Well, it is 4 o'clock, and so we're going to get going here shortly. I think most everyone has been on Zoom with us before and knows where to ask questions and things like that. So feel free to ask. We have a couple people on the back end answering those questions, and if we start to see a trend or a topic that is, a hot topic that we need to jump off on, we as a group can do that. This is, we do want to get through as much information as we can, because we do have three great race directors from three different regions who are presently experiencing three very different hurdles with events, whether they're coming back or not coming back. And so I will let each one of them introduce themselves with a quick 1 or 2 sentence. So, Jeremy Davis.
Sure. Jeremy Davis, Setup Events. I've been directing races since 1997, which is officially 57% of my life.
All right, Fred Summers.
I'm Fred with Summer Sports in Claremont, Florida, and we've been putting on events for 38 years now, and we're about 50% triathlons and 50% running events.
Thanks. And Mike Bone.
I'm Mike. I have Spectrum Sports Management and Spectrum Timing Services in Southern California, outside of Los Angeles. And really kind of our bread and butter in the endurance space is in runs, bike rides, and a little bit triathlon.
Awesome. So we'll jump right in. And this question is for all of you. So we'll pick a direction. I guess we'll stick with Jeremy going first, and then we'll mix it up after that. But so with your business, what's the current status of your business? And how many and what types of events are you putting on, or have you been able to put on? And what do you expect in the next few months? And this is kind of where we diverge for each one of you, I believe. So yeah, we'll start with Jeremy.
Yeah, sure. I'm in the Southeast, so South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and we are back into racing. We took about 6 months to 7 months off, basically from March until all of 2021, or all of 2020, and we're back to, I would say, probably 50 to 60% of our normal schedule. We had a 2,000 person half marathon 5K in Greenville, South Carolina, just a couple of weeks ago, into February. And then we had a triathlon last weekend with about 300 people. But, the events that are happening, we're finding are about the same size as we expected them to be on a non-COVID year. The only issue that we have with a capacity standpoint is that we're not having as many events, because a lot of, not necessarily cities, but host sites are a little bit slow to jump back on board. I think they're still confused as to the liability that they might have for hosting an event. But I think our biggest issue right now is host sites, not necessarily cities allowing events, at least in the Southeast. It's mostly dictated by the site itself. Yeah, and that's where we are, probably about 50% where we should be.
Fred, how about you?
Well, being in Florida, we have a governor that wants the state open. So from an event promoter standpoint, it's been very helpful to us. There's still parts of the state like South Florida where they've been tougher and are just now allowing events, but we're pretty much business as usual. We're fortunate enough to put a couple events on last summer, and then this community locked down again when the COVID cases went crazy. And then we pleaded with the city and were able to start back up in October. We pretty much have been having a full schedule with all our events from then on out. The numbers, our triathlons are strong. I think running is still taking more of a hit. I think maybe because there's more compromised athletes there, and maybe older athletes, but the triathlon, it seems like the demand's there. And I think it's going to be a great summer for those of us that put triathlons on. But running, we're still seeing a lot of people wanting to switch to virtual options and defer and stuff like that. So it's taking more of a hit. But as far as I can tell, by everything our governor's doing and the city sort of follow that I don't see any hurdles in front of us right now, unless something changes dramatically with the COVID situation.
Gotcha, thanks. Well, let's hear about the other side of that coin. Mike.
Yeah, we're in the anti-Florida state. Uh, Our governor shut down early and often, and so for the last year, there have not been endurance events, not sanctioned endurance events taking place in California. There's been a few bandit events out here and there without permits, which is unfortunate, but we've really been shut down. I would say long about January or so, we were out timing a few community runs, which were sanctioned. So California split into 58 counties, and some counties really don't like the governor and the state, so they kind of go in their own direction. So we've been closed down. We're just now coming back. June 15th, the governor's announced the state will reopen. We've been working with the governor and the California Department of Public Health to set the guidelines that'll be in place between now and June 15th, and then trying to educate them to help them open up the state entirely after that. But it's going to be a busy fall for those of us that can hang on just a little bit longer.
Awesome. So we'll go back to you on that note. So how were you able to get the attention of the state officials? Like, how were you able to bend their ear about events, the endurance market, and the importance and relevance of bringing these back? Because you're not alone. You know, California is not alone in these restrictions, and I know you've been doing an enormous amount of legwork over the past 12 or 13 months to get approval for anything. So
yeah, we found, Chris, so in short, 6 months ago, a couple race directors and I got together and we formed the California Coalition of Endurance Sports. California is a big state, right? And there are just a lot of race directors. There's on average, about 8,000 endurance events a year in California, up and down the state. So there's a lot of different people talking to the respective county health departments, state health departments, and everybody was saying something different. So he said, we were in a spot of kind of a vacuum of no industry COVID plans, and we really didn't promote ourselves as an industry, right? And I think one thing that the endurance industry in general and the running industry in particular has done a really poor job of is promoting ourselves as an industry, because we've never had to. So we kind of got together and say, okay, now we have to show what our industry does in the state, and that we're not just, the person next door that goes out and puts on a 5K around the block, that we're professionals and this is what we do. And these are the criteria we work with. So how we got their attention was just that. Boy, we set up this, Greg on my staff set up a website, I think over a weekend for the coalition, and started promoting. We had a lot of people jump in. People at race raves have been fantastic. Everybody from Ironman and the LA Marathon down, to the smaller trail run community. Triathlons have gotten involved. Everybody. We keep telling the politicians, if you've ever walked a 5K to raise money for charity, you're part of our endurance industry. You might not think it, but you're part of it. So we started aggregating those numbers. And in California, conservatively, our industry is generating $1 billion a year in economic activity. And not surprisingly, our biggest supporters came out of the convention of visitor bureaus of the individual cities that all of a sudden looked down saying, gosh, nobody's staying in our hotels. Right. So that was a big help. Probably the most significant thing we did was aggregate our charitable contributions, which again, in California is right around $70 million a year. So, when you have the federal government passing $2 trillion in relief, $1 billion doesn't move the needle a lot, but you mentioned 70 million out of nonprofit pockets taken directly out of them and just not happening.
Right.
That got their attention. So I think we're on a good path. I think we're going to end up with some guidelines that will help us. After June 15th, as I said, we finally got Dr. Aragon from the Department of Health on the phone in a conference call. I asked him a question, and a year later, he said, "You are such a low-risk industry. We're really not concerned about you."
That's good to hear.
Yeah, it was fantastic, right? It's just a lack of. It's easy to get mad at the politicians because they don't know our industry, but they don't know our industry, and we needed to educate.
Right, right. Well, Fred, you've obviously had a very different experience in, the state opening up early. Sure, you had to close back down, but you then opened back up for events. So since you've probably put on the most in-person events in the past, few months, what challenges are you dealing with that are unique to now that you didn't have to deal with maybe back in 2019?
I think the biggest challenge we have is people don't realize we're still in a pandemic, and we are still following protocols, although we're loosening them up a little bit. But we're still seeing, like, we can force the athletes to wear a mask coming into registration and packet pickup, but once the race starts, to get them to put a mask on afterwards is becoming a challenge. And I look at our post-race video and photos and say, good grief, half the people aren't wearing a mask, even though the announcer is saying it. So my fear is somebody that wants to stir something up could come in and do it. We're the athletes all in all have been understanding and just appreciative, as we all know, that they're just glad and happy to race again. But it just takes that one person to get that one photo of 20 people with their arms around each other when COVID is still spiking a little bit in Florida. That could create problems, but pretty much it's just getting the athletes to hang in there for a couple more months, follow the protocol, and then hopefully we'll be operating under the new normal, whatever that is.
Yeah, I would say you are not alone in that hurdle. I know I've dealt with that directly and had to walk up and separate people or ask them directly to put on a mask. And it's a very uncomfortable conversation, but it can be. And Jeremy's nodding his head. I'm sure he's had to deal with it as well. But Jeremy, so last year you've held a number of virtual events, and one of which was a virtual triathlon. I don't know if you did a virtual triathlon series, but I know you did a virtual triathlon or two. We didn't see as many of those last year as we did virtual runs. So talk about the logistics. Talk about the logistics there and what kind of response you got and what you did to engage people.
Yeah, and I'm sure every race director here has the exact same scenario that they've run through with virtual events. Is right in the beginning, they were very popular, at least enough to kind of keep some money coming into the coffers. And then very quickly, the virtual fatigue set in. And we saw that kind of downward sloping curve with our triathlon. So we just, at first, we didn't know what to do. We just kind of threw our hands up in the air and we're like, this will be over. Honestly, everyone, I think, thought that. But in a couple of weeks, we'll be back putting on the minutes. And but we put on an 8-week challenge to start, so a challenge event, which was really probably our most popular event. And surprisingly, we actually made as much. We just told people, hey, look, we don't have any revenue, and this is what we're doing to put this event on. And we had almost as much revenue from donations of athletes to us, knowing that full well was simply coming to us. But that's because we have a huge following, like a family, a tribe kind of situation with our triathlons. We have the South Carolina Triathlon Series, and we see the same athletes week after week, very similar to what Fred has down there in Florida. I mean, we know our triathletes by name. Mike, in dealing with some of the larger marathons that we deal with, you just can't do that. And so we were very lucky with our virtual events in that these athletes knew us, they knew that we were hurting, and they supported us because of that. You see a lot of these virtual events advertised even now on Facebook, and the only thing I can imagine that those guys are doing are spending a ton of money on marketing, because these are not race directing companies. These are marketing companies who are putting on these virtual events. And we eventually had almost zero luck with the virtual events later in the year. But with that said, the triathlon that we put on was a little unique. I mean, there's no way to verify any of this stuff. We had athletes follow us on Strava. It was piecemeal. I mean, RunSignup's tools are excellent, and they've evolved to be even better. And we still use them in our in-person events to allow people who don't want to race to do some of those things. But the triathlon thing was weird. We had to manually verify Strava segments, and we had to keep manual spreadsheets. And we're not a tech company. We're a race directing company. we didn't have anybody to build us an app, or we didn't have the budget to build an app. So we made it work with Google Docs and RunSignup and Strava. We piecemealed it together, and it worked for us, and it kept some money coming in. So we were pleased with it.
Awesome. Well, obviously now you're starting to come back. And so what was it like, or you started to come back for that 6-month or 8-month time period? What was the hurdle coming back? Not necessarily like logistics wise, but, knocking the rust off. What was it like to come back after so much time away?
I've been doing this for 24 years, and I was nervous last week at our first. I mean, that's our first open water triathlon since October of 2019, and I was sick to my stomach race morning, and it's like, this is a 300-person triathlon, and I'm nervous about it. But I mean, I think that's just the main thing, is you get out of the habit. You forget that everything's going to go fine. You forget that you've done all the prep work, and it reminded me of the early 90s, putting on a triathlon and not sleeping the night before and throwing up before all the athletes get there because you're so nervous. But I mean, I think that was the biggest thing. And the other issue that I have personally, and especially coming back a little bit earlier than other states around us, North Carolina, for example, is not coming on board nearly as quickly as South Carolina is. The problem I have as a race director is actually advertising these events that we are legally permitted to do. I have a personal problem with that. So our advertising suffer because it's a weird spot that we're in. It's right. It's like, you want everybody to know that you're doing this event, but then you really don't want to advertise that you're doing this event because you almost feel a little guilty. So I think that's been another personal struggle, is that, like Fred said, you see these athletes who come out and you're happy to have them there, and they're not following the protocol that you set. It's kind of a strange place to be. I think those were the two things that stood out, especially at the triathlon. Is watching people and being excited and nervous, but at the same time seeing them not following these protocols that you're setting out there. So it's a mixed bag right now.
Yeah. So Fred, you do a number of ultra distance events. And so obviously you're still dealing with a lot of these protocols in place for social distancing or just staying safe. So in terms of your race courses, what are your plans going forward into the summer? Because obviously up north it gets warm, but maybe not as hot as it does down where you are, and you're putting on some ultra distance events that can't go without aid stations.
We've been having the same amount of water stations. It's just that we've been making them more on the self-serve side, and then serving water in 8-ounce bottles and stuff like that. I mean, my goal is, unless something changes, we plan to phase that out by June and get back with cups and the typical aid station. So for the rest of April, May, I mean, we're still doing the cups and everything. The challenge that we've had, especially early on when we were a little bit more rigid with our COVID plan, when you have volunteers that have been working like bike support stations forever, it's hard to tell them, no, you physically can't hand a bottle out to the athlete. You can't stand out there and do what they're used to doing. Or with cups for the run station, tell them you put the bottles on a table and space them out a foot, and the athletes get them themselves. So it's not until I look at, again, video footage or something that was taken out on the course, and I see all the volunteers lined up there handing out the water and all that. So it's definitely been a challenge because they mean well, but they want to get into it and do that. But it creates a tremendous amount of waste. It's not good for the environment. But that's what it took. And that's when we were pleading with the city to allow us, we were eliminating all these touch points and open containers and stuff like that. But, food is still all sealed post-race in individual containers. But we are definitely thinking by June, we'll be able to lighten that up, a lot, and almost get back to normal. We can, serve hot food and stuff like that.
Sure. So Mike, on your end, you're kind of like nearing this, like the light at the end of the tunnel of being able to come out and put on races again. And you also are involved with a number of very, very large events. And so just kind of curious with where you are now, how you're projecting, how you're planning for the summer, the fall, because I know a lot of a lot of people that are in states that have opened up, they maybe had an easy button because they came out of this a bit at the end of the year, and so they started the year back, whereas you're coming in, it kind of looks like in the middle of a season. And how do you prepare for that? How are you preparing for that?
Yeah, probably not well, because I don't, there's no handbook on this, right? But
Right.
there's some positive signs. So we have a pretty active fall season on our own events, specifically on Catalina Island. So about a month ago, we said, let's just go through and clean up all of our registration, update it, make sure it's ready to go so that when we get these orders from the Department of Health that we're expecting, we're ready to go, because I don't want to start spending money advertising on something that isn't going to happen, or I don't at least have a high confidence level. So we did that. People are finding us. I mean, people are signing up with no social media, no advertising. We just wanted to be ready to go. I think there's a lot of people doing that. I've seen a handful here in California. I've seen a handful of emails saying, hey, racing's back, get ready for this time, or for the October time. Traditionally speaking, there's not a lot in California in July outside of the 4th of July. It's pretty hot, so there's not a lot of activities until we get into that September, which is making the scheduling really ugly. But for what we're doing, we're just gosh, we're kind of budgeting to break even and just want to get back to some cash flow, and get back to re-engaging with our athletes who we just haven't talked to in the longest time on a consistent basis. Give them the benefit of the doubt that they hopefully are ready to come back, but some of them clearly won't be. And then trying to incorporate the ever-moving goalpost of what the Department of Health is going to expect. So there's the state and then the counties and who's going to set what parameters. And yeah, it's not easy. I don't think I answered your question, but as you can tell, we're kind of figuring it out as we go, type of thing. We think we have it kind of figured out, and then something else happens, and sometimes something for the positive, where okay, we need to have a rolling start like you were talking about last time, and now, well, after the 15th, maybe we don't. Maybe after the 15th of June, when the governor has announced there will be no capacity limits, meaning you could sit shoulder to shoulder 50,000 people at a Dodger game, I should be able to put 4,000 people at a start line, right? So, so the rules keep changing.
Right. Well, with those changing rules, and we're going to get this question to everybody, especially for you, what kind of participant management strategies are you implementing, like refunds, transfers, virtual, whatever, just to make it so that you're not refunding if you do, cap out that are you setting things up so that you're refunding everyone? Or are you transferring if they have to? What's your
we're not refunding. We're trying hard not to refund.
Right.
We have some rollovers from last year, right? So we had some events, specifically the Catalina Island Marathon, that the state shut down 3 days before the event. That event's now been scheduled 3 different times. We're trying our hardest to accommodate them, but we're all making this up as we went initially, right? I think probably 90% of the race directors out there are saying, well, refunds, no refunds, rollovers, half rollovers. We're trying to provide great customer service with an unknown future.
Without going back.
So we landed on providing rollovers for the next 2 years. We don't know how many people are going to take advantage of that. So we do have capacity limits, but they're flexible limits. They're not hard caps that we're telling ourselves. We are providing opportunities to roll in out a couple of years. So 22 or 22, 23, if you're more comfortable with that. We don't generally beforehand, we didn't offer refunds unless it was, kind of a doctor's excuse or a military deployment. But we're trying to stick to that and still provide good customer service. And by and large, I think the whole industry would recognize, I would hope by now, like everybody else, we were yelled at first, and you thieves and you rotten people and you're stealing our money. And I think now everybody's lost, we've all been in this for so long. I think they're just much more understanding. And there's also those people that are saying, well, I'm not going to sign up till you have assurance you're going to have the event. Totally get it. We'll be ready.
Are you still doing your normal price increases?
No, we did not do price increases. I think now is not a good market to bribe people to enter or incentivize, whatever term you want to put on it. So what we did is for our events, we took the average per head entry fee from 18 and 19 and just put that as an average. And we did a 2-price structure for most events. Here's one price now and one price when we get a little closer. Because I don't know the exact, I mean, we all have increased cost, of course, when the event gets closer, but I can't predict what's going to be required for health and safety and that kind of stuff. Other expenses are going to come up. So we're going to try that 2-price structure. In 22, we'll be back to our regular format of what we were doing in 19 is our current thinking. But for this year, we just want to make it, I want a low barrier of entry.
Yeah. Yeah. So Fred, what about you? What are you right now implementing in terms of participant management strategies on the refunds, transfers, virtual options for people registering right now?
We've been very customer service focused. We're trying to keep the athletes happy, and it really helps when you have a full menu of events because it makes it easy to transfer to another event versus, we're trying to get away from deferring people to 2022. There's only been a couple cases. We're definitely have not been doing a refund unless it's a specific case. As Mike mentioned, someone in the military that got, sent out, or, our overseas athletes and stuff like that. But, with RunSignup, it makes it easy if you have, 20 of your own events to transfer that entry into another event. But, the challenging part we have is now, athletes that still don't want to race this year want that to be transferred through to next year. So we have to determine, do we really want to keep doing that? At some point, you got to draw the line when we're sort of in our new normal. And then you always have that handful of athletes that you just can't please no matter what you do and send the threatening letters and all that. But all in all, I mean, it makes it easy when you can give them a race credit that they can use for any of the events you own or put them in another event. There's been a little bit of a challenge with triathlons because when they transfer to a completely different event, the USAT one day doesn't transfer, and the communication from USAT up until recently has been non-existent. So, but we're getting that in order now. But the triathlons have been a little bit more challenging than running events, to do that.
Are you, were those virtual options, are you setting a different price?
No, the challenging part with virtual, we had virtual events before they were really popular because it gave us a way of athletes that couldn't make it. We would say, well, you can do a virtual option and you get your shirt and medal and all that. But a lot of our events now, especially the multi-sport events, have duathlon, aquabike, 3 different triathlon distances, a 5K with all different price points. And you can't have like 10 virtual options for one event because it's just so hard. So we usually have a standard like $39 virtual event, whether it's a half marathon or 5K or whatever. I mean, the virtual, we had some standalone virtual events during the summer and this past year, and we're continuing forward with virtual only events. But pretty much for all our virtual events, we're keeping the price point down at like a $39 price point when they get a medal and a shirt and we mail it out. And athletes that switch to virtual, then we make them pay a $7 mailing fee because there's a lot of work behind the virtual events. But virtual events are good because you can convince a lot of people, like, why don't you just switch to virtual? You can get the medal and the shirt. People that are demanding a race credit or something like that, so you can easily sort of push them in that direction first, so you're not losing another potential entry fee for a future event. Because it's been a challenge, like Mike said, when you defer 100% of your field over the next year, especially when you're close and you've already absorbed all those costs, your revenue is down 60-70%, even if you take in new entries. So if you cannot push another free entry into a future event and get them to take swag from this year and move ahead, it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. Jeremy, what about you in terms of your race strategy for participant management, refunds, transfers, virtual?
Yeah, so we were in the same boat as Mike. We were literally driving to the event down in Paris Island. It's a 500-person triathlon, So we were 2 days out, and that's when we got the call from the base to just turn around and the event was canceled. So we're trying to treat each event individually rather than looking at our events as a whole. Like that particular event, we offered a 50% credit for whatever they paid into any future triathlon events, because we all know moving money from one year to the next is one thing, but if you can get people into other events, that's not real money. $100 paid moving into another event, it doesn't cost you $100 in that other, especially if it's an event where you're hitting that the number, whatever it takes to break even. So we've done that. Like Fred said, it's nice to have other events to move people into. But a lot of our events that were later in the year, we've just done 100% credit rollovers. And the main reason for that is I'm at a point where I don't want to deal with the anger. And if someone's that angry about their $50 or $60, they can have it back. And I'll send them an email saying, please don't ever race with us again. And that's fine. It's great to be customer service oriented, but for me, it's just moving away from that sort of anger situation that a lot of people had early on. And it was hard. As a race director, it's really hard to keep getting blasted, pelleted over and over and over about how terrible you are. Well, then it's just easier just to say, sure, have a refund. And that's no problem. And I'm walking away from you as a customer. We've been really liberal with that. Most people are not asking for refunds. And that's the thing. That's the beauty. I think what we're seeing from this, at least me personally, is that we're seeing the true athletes who are in it for the love of the sport. They're coming back first, and they're just happy and they're excited to be there. And for the most part, those people are not asking for refunds. They're not even using credits that we give them. I mean, we have people who are paying 100% for our triathlons, full well knowing that they have that 50% credit from the Paris Island Triathlon because they just want to give back. They're just excited to be out there. So for us, it's really about just being super liberal. Like Fred said, with the RunSignup tools, when we have our deferral option shuts off the morning of the race. So if they wake up and don't feel like coming, go online and defer to next year. No big deal. But very few people take advantage of that. And I think early on in my career, I was under the impression that everyone was going to take advantage of that. We're going to lose a ton of money. And ultimately, what I'm finding is very few people who register for an event don't want to come, and they're not going to take advantage of deferrals no matter when you shut them off. So just give athletes the option, and they're going to be a customer a long time if they have something that comes up on a Friday night before an event and they can roll over to next year.
I think something Jeremy just said is key too, is the options, right? The more we definitely found right away, the more options we gave, the more satisfied the customers were. And those that, just like Jeremy, those that wanted to complain and call us names and just raise a ruckus, they went on our naughty list, and they're no longer welcomed at our events.
So
and that's nothing negative, right? Just they can go run or ride somewhere else. We just don't need the headache.
They can go race in Florida.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're paying airfare.
Yeah, I worked some with Jeremy years and years ago, and there was an actual blacklist of athletes that fell on that were that type of person that would just cause a stink and make a scene. And there weren't many people on it. I think there was maybe 6 out of 100,000 that were on it, but they could not register for our events. So
that's a note that RunSignup needs that little check option in their profile, blacklist.
Noted. I'll let Bob know.
That's on his list.
Yeah. So, well, back to Jeremy. So think back to the first event that you were able to have, like the first in-person event, coming back out, and what was the process in working with the decision makers in the community on being able to bring back racing in your area?
Yeah, and similar, but yet different than what Mike was talking about, is a lot of these officials, they don't have any guidance either. I mean, you think that someone in your, local recreation district who issues your permits has any sort of guidance, and they don't. So they're kind of making this up just like we are. The main thing was just to communicate and ask them questions and see what concerns that they had. I think those were the first steps in figuring out, getting in front of them the information that they want to see. But yeah, our first event back was a large half marathon in Greenville, South Carolina, and we wrote a very extensive COVID plan. Basically, we lived 6-7 months through COVID, so going to restaurants, dealing with things like that, what kind of issues that governments have. So we addressed all those that we could think of. Everything from having corrals of, I think our cap in South Carolina was 250 max by the time the event came around. So we had corrals of less than 250, and we spaced those out. We put all of our dots on the ground, and everybody's spaced out. And the main thing is just getting that information in front of those decision makers, and at the same time kind of teaching them a little bit more about what your event is. You think everybody knows what a half marathon is and how it runs, but a lot of these people have never been out there. They don't know how this goes. They don't understand a lot of the things that happen. So explaining it to them, being very clear, and more than anything, following through on those things. Because once you put it out into the public, if you don't follow that, it's almost like you're better to have zero plan if you're not going to follow a plan that you put out there. So set your plan out there and then check back with it, because I wrote a COVID plan, a 6-page COVID plan, and there were things in it that I don't even remember writing. So having to go back and check it and making sure you're following through with those things. But coming back out, it was a lot of the same stuff. It's just you're doing things in that different way. You're doing those corrals. Like Fred said, we're setting 8-ounce bottles out at the aid stations. We're telling people to go home once they finish. And we're wearing masks. There were very basic things that we had to follow through. But outside of that, it was racing as normal, just with a few changes.
Right on. Fred, what about you when you were first coming back out? What conversations did you have to have with your local decision makers?
At the beginning, it was pretty tough. We really had to lobby our city council and the county commission to get them to approve the events. And we had to, just like Jeremy said, a lot of them know about the events and are familiar, but they don't understand how it works, and trying to talk about capacity and trying to get them to understand that there's multiple starts. So even though you may have 800 people there, it's like a triathlon, it can be starts of 50 people. So it's a lot of 20, 50 person races there. So convincing them that people are going to be spread out, it's open air, all the positive stuff. We're not in an enclosed environment. They finally sort of got the gist of it, and they sort of approved it with caution. And then when we had our first event, I think it was in late June, we were able to have our first event. They actually thanked us and said we did an awesome job. And my biggest fear, like all of us, we had our first event canceled like hours before the start. And it was because, the city warned us that people were going to come picket our event because it was a triathlon, our March event that brings a lot of out-of-state athletes in. And they're saying, you're bringing all these people from out of state, with COVID into our community and getting us all sick. So my biggest fear was that they were going to get that one photo in June of everyone not wearing a mask together, because you can always find that photo someplace. And then they would say, no, we gave you a chance and you failed. And even though the event went extremely well and 99% of the people had masks on, but you can always find that one photo. So it's just like, we've mentioned before, it's the uncertainty going forward. Like, will you be able to have the next event 2 weeks later, or are you going to have to wait? So that was probably the toughest part. But now, I don't think they really care. They approved our whole schedule, no restrictions, nothing. So I think it's just because we did do a good job at the beginning, and it's just Florida sort of has the mentality like COVID's disappearing or something.
Gotcha. Well, Mike, you've already kind of answered that question, since you're on that same path right now of getting ready for your first event. So instead of answering that, what are you hearing from your athletes in terms of comfort level in racing? Are there concerns being expressed?
Yeah, but very, if you were a statistician, it would be irrelevant numbers so far. You know, we've put out, well, so we went out to our staff, our contract said, here's the schedule, and they're ready to go. You know, they're on board. And we put out some information on Facebook with our company Facebook about the coalition newsletters. You know, we would get 5, 6, 10, 12 people saying, shame on you, there's still a pandemic going on, blah, blah, blah. And the rest of them saying, right on, when can I register? When can I sign up? So it's, at least in our experience, it's been very, very heavily skewed towards we're ready to get out. And I think one thing that California, well, I guess many states, but here, speaking for California, they have done a good job just in hammering home these directives, right? The masking, the social distancing, and we've kind of all, even if we objected at first, we've thrown our hands up and said, fine, I just want to go to a restaurant. You know, just let me go to an Angel game. If I need to wear a mask, I'll do it. So it's just kind of become accepted. I think there are organizations, Ironman, I think, has done just an awesome job with bringing back their events and the protocols they had to show that it can be done safely. So that's been great. So we're answering questions. We've included in FAQs about COVID safety plans. We've put it right out front and center, right? Not hiding from it. And if somebody calls with a specific question, we'll give them a specific answer. But we think people are ready. The biggest challenge we're all going to have in Southern California is going to be this fall schedule with events going, 2, 3 deep every weekend. And even with their, the athletes, they're more upset about that, from what I've seen reading, than they are about how come you're coming back to racing, we're not ready, there's still a pandemic. Because you could say that about everything.
Right.
They're still buying tickets to the Dodger game. Then
right.
So you could say it about that too.
Yeah, we've experienced something similar here in Charleston, South Carolina, with the bridge run kicking until the fall. And so the entirety of the fall calendar of smaller events, like regional events, is in a panic, because what does this mean to us? So like there's a domino effect to these mid majors and majors that have been moved all into the same time frame.
Yeah, that's a problem, but I think it's just communication. I just think, right, we're all in this as event directors, everybody's kind of in the same boat here. So if you move on my weekend or the weekend before and you're not usually there, it's like, hey, we got to get to the next calendar year.
Right.
We got to, let's keep everybody engaged. And I think one thing, hopefully through the coalition also, that we've realized, there's not Spectrum sports athletes or runners and
Right.
LA marathon runners and Orange County marathon runners. There's runners. And if we all take care of them, they'll all come back to those traditional events that they like and go on and try something new.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So let's see. I haven't seen any other, just for you guys listening in, again, we will absolutely float your questions too. So if you have specific questions, I know you guys are kind of chatting amongst yourselves as well, but feel free to, if you have any specific questions, shoot them out there. We've still got questions to go through, but we'd love to engage you if possible. So now, Mike, are you solely working in California, or do you have events outside of California as well?
No, for the last several years, we've been in mainly Southern California.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. And so, Fred, same question to you about Florida. Do you have events outside of Florida, or just in Florida?
Yeah, we have events. I mean, most of our events in Central Florida, but we do travel throughout Florida. Like next week, we're going down to Naples for an event, and they were sort of locked down a little bit hard, but the only protocol they made, the race director do was, it's a reverse triathlon where they start with a run first. It's one of the old ones that's still hanging around. So she can only start 4 athletes at a time every 10 seconds. So which is sort of good for us, it throttles them out. So we just have to adjust the timing instead of a wave start and accommodate it. But our South Florida event, we have 2 events that we time in South Florida, and both of those have been pushed back into 2022. They just didn't want the gamble of waiting, and especially with the triathlon, that they just decided just to write off 2021 and go to 2022.
So Jeremy, it might be that you're the only multi-state, but I guess with the way things are going, it's so county specific as well. But how are you keeping up with all these regulations in different places?
Luckily, every city that we work with, I would imagine almost every city that's worth putting an event on. I mean, there's plenty of small cities, but no one wants to put a race on there. So every big city or medium-sized city has a great group of people who do this every day. So it's just communicating with them. We don't have to keep up with anything. We can check in with a city and say, hey, we're thinking about putting our permit in for our November events. What's the status? And they get back to us and say, now's not the time. Give us a month, or it's probably not going to happen, but we'll keep our fingers crossed. I mean, so every city's really easy to work with. I mean, you could put on an event in any city in the country with that model, right? I mean, I could go into California and put on an event and just calling the right people and asking, what is your status right now? And they're very quick to answer. And most of these places want events. They're in the same boat as us, right? Their revenue is hurting just like ours. And these people want events. And if they are given even a small percentage of green light, they're going to say, we're going to make this happen. And that's what we've been finding. But from a state standpoint, obviously you can just figure these things out. North Carolina, I mean, the governor puts out statements and you just find those and you listen to them. South Carolina is completely different than North Carolina. And, Alabama is very similar to South Carolina, but Birmingham is its whole other place. Birmingham is, is just completely different. So it's just asking the questions and letting those people who do this every day tell you what the situation is.
Gotcha. Cool. And I'm sure that goes for everybody as they're traveling. As I was asking that question, I realized it's less and less about state regulations. Maybe for Mike right now, it's statewide, but it's also just county by county. And so you don't have to be in multiple states.
It's venue to venue is what we're finding. I mean, we have events that are in places that have zero restrictions who simply will not let us be there. And ultimately, as none of us here own event sites that I know of. So we're at the mercy of all of these venues. And if you want to maintain that sort of relationship down the road, then all you can do is say, I get it, I understand. And if that changes, let me know.
Yeah. Well, so we do have one question. It'll probably be our last one. And that is, someone asked about setting up registration in a manner so you can handle, like, for instance, a set number of people that you normally cap out. It could be 1,000, it could be 25,000. And then having mandated restrictions or mandated caps down the line. And I know that most of us have dealt with enforced caps in some way, shape, or form. So it might not be after you've opened registration. It could be before that, going into it. You normally have 10,000 people or 5,000 people in an event, and you're now cut in half because of the regulations in place. How, and we'll go around to each of you. How are you approaching that if you have that kind of problem? So, Mike, with your planning, I know you said that it might be wide open here fairly shortly, so it might not be a hurdle that you're looking at having to deal with.
Well, no, we are, because of the uncertainty around vaccinations, right? The Dodgers just announced this morning that they have a whole third of the stadium, I think it is, that they're opening up just if you could prove vaccination. So that's such a big question, I think, nationally as we open up. So our strategy on capacities is just to go back to where we were at in 2019. That's what we're planning on until we're told otherwise. The one caution, and one of our coalition members, and I love the way he put it, I think the one caution for all of us is at some point we need to recognize that there are these safety precautions out there around COVID. But if we're going to be given a permit to do the Catalina Island Marathon, I'm going back to the numbers, our full capacity numbers in 2019 till I'm told otherwise. And the way he puts it that I like is like, why do we have to ask Mother May I? we're not going to keep, all due respect to the counties and the cities that we have great relationships with, like everybody on this Zoom meeting right now. Unless the state or the county comes out and says, hey, for XYZ reasons, you can only have 50%. We're planning on going. Now, are we going to get there in this market with so much competition? I don't know. We'll see who can market the best, I guess. But we're not self-imposing any limits until the state or the county specifically says we have those limits. And even then, after they can answer, why can I sell out a baseball stadium and I cannot have a healthy outdoor activity where people are socially distant?
Gotcha. What about you, Fred? Have you had to deal with any imposed caps in advance that maybe you've had to change the way you're charging or what resources you have on site?
Not as much with the event management side. With the event timing side, we've had some challenges because some races we gave a great deal because of the big numbers. So when their numbers drop down to 50% of that, it doesn't make financial sense. So we've been saying with the timing side of our business, it definitely has an impact. But for our events, we don't have any mega events that are at capacity or close to it. And like even with the Great Floridian, when we went to the city and they wanted low numbers, we inflated our numbers into what the event, if we really wanted to squeeze as many people in as possible, the event could hold 2,500 people, but we're going to bring it down to 40% capacity and have less than 1,000 this year to make it work. So that's what we sort of pitched to the city, was gave them the numbers that we wish we would have. And then in reality, but, we're going into it being more, not quite as optimistic, but our numbers have been holding to what they were a couple of years ago. We haven't seen in all our events that have taken place since January and forward. And we're being very aggressive too with communicating with the athletes. If you're not going to show up, because there still are quite a few people that aren't comfortable racing, so we can weed out the people so we don't have empty venue space, especially with triathlon. You don't want to have a triathlon set up for 1,000 people and then you have 200 athletes there. So we've been pretty aggressive with the email. If you're not going to race, let us know so we can take you out of the event and open up your space to someone else.
Gotcha. What about you, Jeremy? Have you had?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because it's not an event budget is not a set thing. So if someone came to me and said, this 500 person triathlon that you put on can only have 250, there's a lot of angles that I can go to make this 250 person event work financially. And there's also been, there's a change in mindset, right? Like, what are my options? My options are $0 of revenue, or the revenue that I can make from a 250 person event versus the 500. So, there are things that there are events that we've decided not to have that we could have been permitted to have because of restrictions, yes. But most of our events, I mean, triathlon in general, the normal sprint or international distance triathlon that you see, every week is not getting those kind of numbers that really matter, right? You're not making a huge profit off those things to begin with. And the option then goes from, if you're making $10,000 on this triathlon versus $0 on this triathlon, I'll be happy to make 2 or 3 versus the 0. So it's really just about kind of morphing the event in a different way. If that means offering less things that cost you money, such as a post-race meal, you can very easily say, hey, COVID restrictions, we can't have this post-race meal, and you're saving money there. I don't want to get into a situation where I'm raising the price on an athlete, because the athlete's going to understand exactly what you're doing. Now, if there's a way that I could put on an event for 250 versus the 500 and make it a better experience for the athlete, then I could consider that. But, yeah, I mean, it's just all over the map on what you can do to make that event still happen, even with those imposed limits.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I think that we have pretty much gotten to our time point here, and I haven't seen any additional questions come through. So I don't know if Elizabeth wants to jump in and do a end of day wrap up, or I can do a song and dance and say thank you to everybody for being here.
I'll see you do the song and dance, Chris. Thanks everybody for attending. our Spring Forward seminar. The recording of this session and all the sessions from earlier in the day will be out hopefully tomorrow afternoon on our YouTube channel, and you'll also get an email since you were all registered for the event. So thank you all for coming.